Sounds okay? Sure.
Is there a difference? And if so, what is it between ideology and dogma?
I don't really know. Maybe they both are reduced into just a set of belief systems. Maybe. I've never thought about it, never written about it, never read about it. Maybe it just doesn't interest me, I don't know. Dogma and what?
Ideology.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if... yeah, I don't know. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Talk about survivor's guilt.
Survival's guilt. What was his name? Something Goodall. I'll tell you a story about survival's guilt. You may not be able to relate, and it may be completely irrelevant, but it's the only thing that comes to mind right now. My brother-in-law, his name is Murtaza, he's a dentist. When he was 18, and joining the military in Iran is mandatory, as is for most Middle Eastern countries. And so it was during a time where Iran and Iraq, they were in a war. You know, 1 million people died, many million were injured. He was sharing the bunker with a friend of his. They've been together for about maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And his friend, I think it was his last day before his service was completely done. He could just go home, be with his family. So he tells my brother-in-law that since today is my last day and I won't see any bloodshed, at least in this particular space anymore, why don't you go visit your family? You have another year to go. It's okay. So Murtaza, my brother-in-law, leaves, visits his family, and that very night, a bomb drops on that very bunker. We don't have such a language back home in Iran, and sometimes you have to wonder that if a certain language does not exist, if you don't have the language for certain experiences, will you have emotions for it? Will you have reflections about it? Or will you just accept it as part of life and just move on? I'm sure he felt bad. I'm sure he felt guilty, sad, but it didn't paralyze his life. You know, we didn't have what's it called? PSTD or something? Post-traumatic syndrome? Yeah. And because of certain words not being there, you don't reflect on it, you don't think about it, you don't feel about them. And so, I suppose since it may be a Western thing that has migrated into Middle East and other places right now, it's a story I shared in this class some time ago about having a friend. She had, her first daughter was disabled, her second daughter was okay, but the second daughter could never have fun because she would always see her mom and her dad somewhat being sad because of the first daughter and all the demands that, you know, a child with disability will impose upon you. And so, as a mother, you're like this flower that's about to bloom and be joyous and happy. But the moment your child comes out and she has some dysfunctions, the leaves, the petals kind of fall. And joy and laughter are replaced by sorrow and tears. And I don't know if she's completely recovered. The daughter passed away about a couple of years ago, or maybe last year. But her daughter, the second one, her relationships have always been with men who were somewhat sick. Sick in the sense that they were not well, they couldn't think well, they couldn't feel well about things. They always had a rough history. And it seemed to me, and I may be wrong, that because she had seen her parents just taking care of, their first daughter all the time, it made her feel as if that's how her relationship needs to be. She needs to find a man who is unhealthy so she could be with them and maybe fix them. And, when she used to come to the house, when we had gatherings, she used to come from 3 hours away. On few occasions, she had mentioned to me that she just doesn't know how to be happy because of her sister. And then when her sister passed, she found this release. For the first time, she could feel as if she could go out there and find a man who was relatively healthy and have a happy life. I'm not sure if she's successful, but because once you become addicted or in the habit of being a certain way, it's very, very difficult to change. I'm in the habit of thinking about things a certain way. I can't change. And despite how open-minded I may be, it's not that I don't want to. My habits will always get in the way. And I don't think I have too many psychological issues. If, on the other hand, you've had some issues and those issues have been persisting, you've been trying to get rid of them, but they keep pushing forward, sometimes even more forcefully than before, you're going to have certain habits that are never going to go away unless there is like this new force that enters into your life. Survival is good. It reminds me of a story that was given to us by a Chinese philosopher by the name of Chuang Tzu. His wife had passed. They've been married for about 50, 60, or 100 years. And his disciples go to his house to pay their respects. And upon entering, his space, they come to realize that he's playing music. He has Snoop Dogg in the background, is dancing, is drinking. And the disciples ask him, what's wrong with you? Your wife just passed away. And he said that if I was to start crying, I would say that life is wrong. The flow of life is wrong. Life, what it does, it allows its creation to live for a while, and then it just kills them, in some shape or form. And I'm just glad that I had my wife for, a number of days, and now she's gone, and that's it. There is, if you watch the movie The Matrix, there's a scene where Morpheus is cuffed by Agent Smith. And it's a good movie to talk about. It's a good movie to kind of analyze and interpret. And Agent Smith looks out the window and says, look at people out there. Even if you were to give people happiness, they would destroy the happiness because they're so comfortable with sadness, misery. I think a good amount of survival's guilt, or any guilt, some guilts are really, really good to have for a while, and then you have to sacrifice them. I think when you lack the proper self-knowledge, when you lack the proper understanding of life, you have certain experiences, instead of them staying with you as your guests for a few days or a few months, they just linger on for months and sometimes years and decades. Yeah. So, Anyone else? Before we... Michelle?
I've kind of read a lot of the stories about, like there's like a correlation with trees and serpents, and a lot of religion and also pagan stories, and they usually tend to have something to do with like the cycle of life and wisdom. I was wondering if you have any insight to that.
No, not really. What little I know is that, serpents at times represent teachers because they do have healing qualities. The tree is about life. And usually the person, whether you have a dream or you're just reading something, that the person has some distance to go before reaching the tree. So there's a good amount of unhealthiness about the person. And so the snake comes about to kind of remove some of the guilt and kind of trash that lives inside us so we can have access to the tree. That's all I know. There is a guy, you may be interested, he's an Egyptologist, he's long dead. His name is Gerald Massey. He wrote two very, very difficult books. They each are 2 volumes or 3 volumes. One is called Isis Unveiled. The other is called Natural Genesis. They may be out of print, but you may be able to get them at some store. But you may enjoy the symbolism in the books, since he takes everything all the way back to Egypt. So, yeah. And if you have Audible, you can always get Joseph Campbell's 5 volumes on mythology. They are immense.
I'm not sure if I'm reading that. I'm reading the one that's in Cassie's class.
Yeah, Cassie. Yeah, I saw her last night. I'll tell her you said hi.
Yeah, I like your class. I like the book too. It's very enlightening.
Yeah.
I'll have to read more.
She was 17 and she first came to my class, and then she just stuck around. Yeah, Julian.
Talk about being a teacher, more specifically, sharing ideas effectively.
Okay. Well, we can talk about, I suppose, Christianity, and we can kind of put your question within that context, because that's what the 4 Gospels, I think, for me, that's what they represent. So we'll talk about Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, Judas, Mary, and Thomas tonight. So, anyone else? Like practical, easy questions before we make things complicated? Julian?
Having for transfer application.
No, I've never really been that studious. My recommendation is go to the 3rd floor at Laney before like noon, where counselors are fresh and their brain is not fried yet, and have a chat with them, and then transfer. And once you have transferred, plagiarize, take lots and lots and lots of units, get it done very, very, very quickly. Do not waste your time. And don't be a prostitute to information. It doesn't do much for you. I mean, it may excite you for a few minutes, and you may even get more excited as you talk about the information you've stored in your brain with your friends. You'll impress them, it'll kind of create for a good conversation, but it doesn't have much longevity. If you happen to be a reflective human being. If not, then knock yourself out. Anyone else? Yeah.
Regarding transferring, is there a huge difference between San Francisco and East Bay for the philosophy? Okay.
No. Do the school that's closest, cheapest. I mean, if you were to say to me, I got accepted to Yale, I also got accepted to East Bay, I would say go to Yale. or Stanford. Because what you're doing, it's not that Yale is any... I had a student about 2 years ago, she got accepted to Yale in philosophy. And I remember she called me from, I don't know if she was in Turkey or she was somewhere on campus, and she started crying, saying that I have no idea what I'm doing here. The school was paying her tuition, but she just couldn't relate to the ideas that were given to her in her classes. And the only reason that it would be good to stay at Yale is because Yale is like Jeremiah's hammer in the Old Testament. It's like Thor's hammer. It can, open lots of doors for you. They wouldn't care who you are. They didn't care, how you speak. It makes the campus look good. Once they say, yeah, this is Andrew, and he has his PhD or master's from Yale. That's all schools are looking really for. If, on the other hand, you understand the system, if you also have been around to know the difference between information, knowledge, theoretical wisdom, practical wisdom, that's wisdom that has been, brought down here, experimented with, and you get rid of about 80% of what we call wisdom, and 20% is just nugget. It's really, really good. If you begin to look at education from that particular lens, then it would matter to you what school you go to and what books you read, because your agenda is you want to go to school. This is a market-driven culture. You just have to make yourself look good. Now, the advantage that you have, and people in this class, if they're interested in majoring in philosophy or humanities, is if you do get a master's degree before I pass, then you can start teaching here. And all you need is one door to be opened. Once a door opens, other doors will follow. And that has been true for every student that I've had in the past 30 years. Every single one of them who went to school and got their master's and PhD, they taught here for maybe a semester, and then all of a sudden they're just, teaching classes at a variety of different campuses. So, yeah, East Bay is good. But bachelor's in philosophy and your master's in humanities. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. I'm sorry? Say again? So let me begin by telling a story. And then we'll go from there. But perhaps before telling you the story, let me just very, very briefly tell you about how Jesus has been portrayed in the 4 Gospels, at least the 4 that have been canonized. You have approximately almost 40 different Gospels. Around the 4th century, they decided that only 4 are worthy of being read, 4 are worthy of being canonized, and each gospel gives us a window through which Jesus is seen, his teachings, his character, how he was born, what he did, what he said. For those of you who are interested, you don't need to again be religious. Read these books because they're just interesting, and replace Jesus with simply wisdom. That's all you should do. When you look at Gilgamesh, don't look at the person, look at what lives inside the person, and that is wisdom wanting to get out. And Enkidu forces wisdom to at least be noticed, and then Gilgamesh goes on this quest to bring wisdom out and then share it with others. The same thing with the Buddha. That he's a kid like you and I in this class, he has an experience, he comes to realize that ideologies or dogmas are irrelevant in as much as they once used to give him meaning. They don't really do much for him. He enters a psychological darkness. He runs into a few teachers that tell him, yes, indeed, there is this wisdom that lives inside you, but you can't do it on your own. There are certain things that you have to go through. And eventually wisdom comes out, and then he shares it, only to realize it's not good for people, so he hides it. In Hinduism, the story is very much the same, that inside everyone there is this piece of something called wisdom. All of us notice it, but not all of us enjoy being around it because of the hardships and the fears that it creates. But those who have the capacity eventually find a teacher, and through discipline, through faith, through love, that teacher brings wisdom out. And the same is true with Jesus. So here it is. Very briefly, historically, the Gospel of Mark was about 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus, if he ever existed. The Gospel of Matthew is about 50 to 60 years after the death of Jesus. The Gospel of Luke is about 70 to 80 years after the death of Jesus. The Gospel of John is about 90 to 100 years after the death of Jesus. And the Gospel of Judas is about 120 to 180 years after the death of Jesus. And the point is this. None of these books give us an eyewitness account of who this man was, what he said, what he did, where he went. These are just stories. You're dealing with oral cultures. You're dealing with people, human beings, who on the inside have this desire to be around perfection. And so, if Jesus was a historical figure, he represented for those who thirsted and were hungry for wisdom, an embodiment of something they desired to be around. If Jesus did not exist, human beings are imaginative enough, creative enough to create fantasies or stories that can elevate the way they think about themselves and their life. Now, let's look at what happens to wisdom in the Gospel of Mark. Now, since all of us in this class are very, very far removed from wisdom, think of it this way. You have insights, you have certain experiences that you know to be very, very true, and once those experiences come forth, they get rid of your assumptions, and it's a horrifying place to be. So for those of you in this class who have come to realize your parents were right and you were wrong, for those of you who have recognized something about your companion, you want to leave but you can't, for those of you who have again certain insights about your own nature, about the nature of life, pay attention very, very closely to the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is not understood. In the Gospel of Mark, in chapter 3, his parents come forth because they think he's gone mad, he's crazy. In chapter 6, people think he's gone mad, he's crazy. No one should listen to him, he's no good. In the Gospel of Mark, his disciples doubt, despite having seen him perform a variety of different miracles. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus himself begins to doubt himself. In the garden, he just doesn't want to do this anymore. On the cross, he feels completely alone and isolated. How do those things relate to us? Imagine you're in this class and your major is math or history, or maybe you want to drop out of school, whatever the case may be. You come to this class and for some strange reason, you become attracted to some of the ideas. You become attracted, let's say, to the way I express the ideas. You may even be attracted to me in some strange shape or form. And you may want to go home saying to yourself, I'm going to change my major from math to, say, philosophy or humanities or religious studies. For the past, let's just say 5 weeks, every time you come here, your brain begins to become very, very active. You're inspired, you're excited. You have great conversations, not only with yourself, but also with your friends. You begin to write interesting things in your journal. And you say to yourself, at last I have found my voice. It seems like philosophy happens to be my home. That's a great piece of wisdom that you have inside you. But you see, this wisdom lives in society. Wisdom lives in the future. In other words, who's going to pay for your rent? Go tell your best friends that you want to do philosophy, and they will laugh at you. Go tell your parents that you want to do philosophy, and they will say, well, who's going to pay for your rent? Who's going to pay for your car? What are you going to do? If you have realized a few things about your relationship with your friends, with your companion, what you come to realize is that you will do whatever you can to crucify your insight. It's far too painful. You want to get out of the relationship, but you say, no, maybe I can do better with this person. Maybe we can have conversations. Despite repeatedly seeing certain truths about yourself, about the relationship, you keep rejecting it. You keep pushing it away. What you also find in the Gospel of Mark is that wisdom and insight, they're always going to be alone. Always. They're always going to be sad. No one's going to recognize them. No one's going to listen to them. So, the way you should look at the Gospel of Mark, then, is you have either Jesus, or you have wisdom, or you have insights, or you have certain truths that you have access to. And every time they want to blossom, every time they want to grow, you will do whatever you possibly can to get rid of them. And what will happen is, you will enter the Garden of Gethsemane. And despite the inspiration, despite the excitement, despite this feeling that now runs through your veins, you don't need to be religious, but you will say to yourself, let this cup pass by me. I don't want to do philosophy. Look at what philosophy has done. I can no longer talk to my boyfriend. I can no longer focus on my job. I'm no longer interested in math. And then fear overcomes you. Okay. Now remember, we're talking about Jesus Christ from 2,000 years ago. A man who had a great amount of kingdom of God within him. And yet, he became a victim to doubt, to fear, to disbelief. You and I, the sort of wisdom or insights that we may have about certain things about our lives, they will not stand a chance. They will be crushed. We had a tiny little gathering last night, and at the very last minute, one of my friends texted saying, oh, I can't make it. I've known this person for some time, and this person has always been a nomad. And coming to the house, having some food, going to the back room and having conversations that have some depth, substance. They couldn't stand the pressure, so they opted out. It was too much for them. And the point I'm trying to make is what you have in the Gospel of Mark is basically the human condition, that whenever you figure out certain truths about yourself, it damns you, it harasses you, assaults you, and it's too much. And once you get into the psychological darkness or depression, very much like Christ on the cross, you will say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have thou forsaken me? I hear this voice telling me, go to school, do philosophy. Well, I want to do philosophy, but can you somehow give me some money from somewhere? Can you have my parents like me? Can you have my boyfriend or girlfriend at least understand me a little bit? Okay, so that is the Gospel of Mark. Wisdom, truth, insight will always be alone, will always be sad, will always be under an avalanche of doubts, disbelief. You have some elements in the Gospel of Mark that are really, really good, such as if you have any powers, if there are some interesting things that you want to talk about, sell your goods to people who have ears to hear. Don't be a prostitute. Just throw your emotions out towards anyone. Look at your customers very, very carefully. Pick and choose. Be very, very selective. Enjoy being biased and prejudiced that are rooted in experience and wisdom and insight and knowledge. But for that to happen, you have to be around for a while. You can't do that when you're like 18 or 19 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. Gospel of Matthew. The way wisdom works initially, if you were to continue with the Gospel of Mark about Jesus simply being wisdom, where do you take your wisdom first? Well, what we have in the Gospel of Matthew is that whoever the author of this particular Gospel is, wanted to make sure that Jesus is going to be viewed as a Jewish Messiah. If Moses had 10 commandments, you will find about 10 commandments in the Gospel of Matthew. You will find the Beatitudes. You have the spirit of the law. If Moses is the letter of the law, you will find the spirit of the law in the Gospel of Matthew. Genealogy, family tree. It takes Jesus all the way back to Abraham. Why? Because Abraham is the father of Jews. Now, if you have any insights or wisdoms about you, what do you do with it? You're not going to talk to strangers. You're not going to talk to random people. If you're really, really excited about ideas, what are you going to do? You're going to take these ideas home to your boyfriend or to your girlfriend. You're going to take them to your parents. You want to be understood. You want to be seen. You want to be heard. Only to realize that they don't really care. They don't really understand. What you have in the Gospel of Matthew then is this. Whenever you experience certain insights or truths, you will take them to the closest people you have in your life. They will reject you. You will be misunderstood. Now, you also have this very, very, very beautiful story that comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which just sums up the human condition, really. The Buddha couldn't come up with such a story. Moses couldn't come up with such a story. None of the Indian gurus would able be to come up with such a story, and it's called the prodigal son. Some of you may have read the story, some of you may have seen the story. So what you have in the Gospel of Matthew and this particular story is you have a father. The first thing you need to understand is, well, who is a father? What is a father? A father is someone who makes sacrifices to take care of his family. A father is someone who has experience. A father is someone who knows what the past is, what the present is, and what the future is. Father is like gold. Father has wisdom. Now, this particular father has a son or a daughter. What is it that fathers want for their kids? What is it that teachers want for their students? Okay. If, for example, you were to come to my office and you were to tell me very passionately how much you love philosophy, but you've decided to do math or history, even though you don't care for them, but they make you money, well, it's not going to be very difficult for me to sit back, look at you, and figure out how your future is going to be unfolding. I'm going to say, yes, they're going to do computer science, they're going to go to Google, get a job, make about $200,000, and then at a certain point, they will look at their house, only to realize it's never turned into a home. They will look at their relationship, only to realize it's never really been intimate. They will look at their money, only to realize it's been wasted, wrongly spent on the wrong things because you just don't think about things the right way. And then you say to yourself, I wish I would have pursued philosophy. Now, this father happens to be rich. Rich in wisdom, rich in money, rich in experience. But what you have, again, wisdom being misunderstood. Wisdom being overlooked. Why? Because wisdom that happens to be very, very old and ancient, that's the function of wisdom. It goes back all the way to Adam, coming to realize Garden of Eden, coming to realize the serpent, coming to realize the apple tree, coming to realize being expelled, coming to realize how difficult it is to get back to Garden of Eden. Adam has gone through all of that. So when we talk about wisdom, you need to understand it's something as old as humanity itself. Okay? Now, wisdom is always going to be around people who don't know. A son or a daughter, they're young. They're filled with assumptions. They're filled with arrogance. Their pride has not yet been hammered out by life experiences. They have no humility inside them. And even though they may have moments of inspiration, it means nothing. Inspiration is accidental. Okay? The son goes to the father and says, I'm old enough to know how my life should be lived. No one needs to tell me. That's the territory of anyone who's young. Now, you could be young in age, yes. You could also be young in reflection. When you ask, for example, survival's guilt, okay? Yes, you're a 90-year-old man or woman. You ask about survival's guilt, which means what? That you have been living in that space for many, many, many decades. The emotions have been overriding your ability to think, to reflect, to examine, to observe. Which means what? Yes, you are 90. But when it comes to thinking about things deeply, you are young. So remember, wisdom always has a counterpart, and that counter is always going to be young and arrogant. Now here's the thing you need to know about how wisdom and how youth, how they relate. In this particular gospel, you have this very, very beautiful, sad, traumatic saying. You can't make the grass grow by pulling it. If you have come to my office and you have said, I want to do philosophy, I want to do this, and I want to do that, I'll say a couple of things, and I'll just wait and see how things go. I will never call you. I will never text you or email you. Because if you don't call me, if you don't pursue me, it means you're simply not ready. You can't make the grass grow by pulling it. Why would you waste your time, your energy, your life on something that is not yet ready? So you know what happens in the story? The father doesn't say anything to his son. The son says, give me $50,000. Let me go out there and make a life for myself. You have to sit back and say, well, the father has been around for a while, you know. It's very difficult to save money. It's very difficult to figure out how one should spend one's money that doesn't cause regret, doesn't cause harm, pain. The father doesn't care about any of those things. The son doesn't care about any of those things. When a son goes to the father and says, give me your money, when someone in this class says, so what is going to be my grade? How do you care about grade? Don't you pay attention to the things we're talking about? Grade is the least important aspect of this class. And when you say, what is my grade? I won't look at you anymore. You're uninteresting. And I'm not going to spend time and energy convincing you about the unimportance of grade. Ask good questions. Pay attention. Even if you do zero work, I will pass you. So for those of you who have a companion, you want to change them. If they are not ready, they will come to you because they have moments of inspiration, they have moments of openness, and they will talk. They will talk innocently, purely, openly, and you will be moved to help them. But you see, they haven't recognized their issues just yet. Which means that like a tape recorder, you have to rewind and replay, rewind and repeat to no ends. Okay? The father does not talk to his child about the wisdom that lives inside him. Why? You can't make the grass grow by pulling it. His son has ears, but those ears have no ability to hear. He just says, okay, well, here's my ATM card. Here's the code. Go withdraw like $30,000, $50,000, $60,000. What do young people do? Imagine you are physically very, very attractive, but you've never examined the power of beauty. You've never examined the power of exploitation. You've never examined the power of manipulation. So what happens? You attract around you, like honey, all these bees or flies come your way, and you attract the most scummiest of people around you. They're losers, really. They're young, very much like you. They have no education. They don't think well about anything. They're not future-oriented, especially in this day and age, this culture. And so what happens? You move into these relationships with your emotions first, and then when crap happens, then you have to figure out what do you want to do with this person. And that's how young people spend their riches, whether it's youth, whether it's external beauty, whether it's emotional poverty, that they just go around telling people how miserable their life is, wasting their life and wasting other people's time. That's how young people spend whatever riches they may have inside them. Imagine for a moment a father having worked really, really hard, some 2,000 years ago to save about 50,000. And then you have a son who casually knocks on his door and says, Dad, I'm 18 now. I'm an individual. I am free to do whatever. Don't give me advice. What the hell do you know? And the father says, okay. Gives him the money. And so this kid goes out and, he goes to Oxford or Stanford and goes to frat parties and drinks and smokes and has lots of sex. Watches movies all the time, buys fast cars. And after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or months, or weeks, or days, the money runs out. And once the riches run out, you're attractive, you're young, you become old, wrinkly, ugly. You have a fresh mind, you cover it with all this ridiculous information and data. And then after a while you realize you want to feel, but you just don't have the energy anymore. And so, he's had a taste of a good physical life, this young kid. But we're all condemned to realize certain truths about ourselves. That's what they call the human condition. It's a miserable place to be. There comes a point where you're no longer young, you're no longer handsome or attractive, you no longer have money, you no longer have the emotional capacity, the physical capacity to travel, perhaps. I had an email from a student I had some 30 years ago. She said, I'm in such a dark place. I said, well, okay, we have some people coming over on Sunday, come on over. I just don't have the capacity. It's been hell. I want to, but I just can't. And this young kid sleeps in the streets. And he survives the best he can, but there is this moment where he says, I have a father, He has like a mansion, he's got 20 bedrooms. Maybe I can go back to my father, and maybe I can repent, apologize. And here's the thing you need to understand. When you are in a state of privilege, you will never think about things the right way. When you're comfortable, when you assume that you know, when you think you're right, you're rich in assumption, you're rich in health, that you can walk, you can drink whatever. So you just put trash in your body the way I do on a daily basis.